Okay, so today we're going to be taking a quick look at the futures wheel. It's a commonly used futures thinking technique in the tool bag of most futures practitioners. It's fairly easy to run, takes about 90 minutes, maybe a bit longer if you want it to. You only need a half dozen or so people, and you can generate a lot of good output, which you can then take into additional exercises. So let's crack on and have a look. Futures wheel, here's an example of a blank one. In the middle is where we put the one key event or change that we want to analyze. And the point of the futures wheel is to look at the first, second, and third order consequences of that event or change. Essentially, we are looking at the implications and knock-on effects of whatever happens in this green circle. So you can probably guess that it goes first order, second order, and third order, like that. Moving along, here is a reminder that each consequence can then spawn multiple other consequences. So you might have one first order consequence that spawns two or more second order consequences. This seems a bit too theoretical at the moment, so let's make it easy to understand by looking at an example. And for today, we are picking everyone's favorite, cheekiest chicken restaurant, Nando's, and we are imagining a future with the unthinkable event that piri piri seasoning has, for whatever reason, become unavailable. So we take that as our central event or trend and we put it right in the middle. Next step, what are the first order consequences that will happen as a result of this seasoning not being available? So to keep it fairly simple for this walkthrough, we've just picked a half dozen. One, disappointed customers. Absolutely, they're turning up to their favorite restaurant and they can't get their favorite food. Loss of brand identity. That seasoning is an intrinsic part of the Nando's identity. Take the seasoning away, and you have essentially a commoditized chicken restaurant that won't stand out from the hundreds of others that are around. The existing menu is now broken. You can serve probably a few of the side dishes, maybe, and a couple of the other alternative dishes that are on the Nando's menu, but 90% probably uses piri piri seasoning. Reduced sales, absolutely, that's an easy one. Wasted food, they probably have the same amount of chicken coming in before this horrendous event of the seasoning disappearing. But with less sales, then that chicken's not getting used at the same rate that it was. Surge in media attention, absolutely. Nando's has good PR, is a well known brand and franchise, so an event of this magnitude would certainly hit the papers. Let's move along to second order consequences now. So you can see that as you go from first to second and then second to third, you will normally see an exponential increase in the amount of ideas that people come up with. So to pick a few from here, loss of brand ID, we just touched on. What is Nando's without its seasoning? Reduced sales. Well, that will obviously have an impact on the people working at those sites. So will all the restaurants be able to stay open at this time? Will they have to close down? What's the implications for the people who work there? Surge in media attention, what do Nando's do with that? Can they make it into something positive, or will it just all be negative? Review bombing from unhappy customers who don't understand perhaps why their food is no longer available, particularly if they've been part of the loyalty program and saved up a bunch of rewards ready to cash them in, only to find out that the chicken has gone. What do Nando's do about their marketing? Do they try and pivot, or do they come up with an alternative to the piri piri? Do they shift their focus to alternative dishes? What are the deals with the supply chain? Are they locked into multi-year contracts to always order the same amount of chicken, and now they don't need that chicken because the sales are much less, and they need to create some new dishes? Those are just a few of the second order consequences. I'm sure there are plenty more that you could come up with. Moving on to the third order consequences, now into the outer ring. I haven't populated this fully because you could spend a good chunk of time on these third order strategies. So let's have a look at some interesting ones. And so lab-grown spices. Imagine there was a way to artificially get the same flavor that you would from the natural seasoning. Would customers and the organization be happy with that? Or would that go against something to do with brand identity or their ethics? Would the Nando's restaurants still be required to buy the chicken that we were talking about earlier that they now have an excess of? Can they get out of those supply chain contracts? Can they change them? Imagine Nando's did find a way to pivot successfully. Would they need to change the decor in the restaurant? It has a very specific theme to do with the seasoning, Afro-Portuguese themed music and art. If that seasoning goes, do you need to change the restaurant appearance to make it more cohesive? Need to create new dishes, so increased investment in research and development. There'll be a competition for the most innovative chefs on the market, so they're in short supply anyway, and restaurants are always looking for the most creative chefs. Now Nando's will need to snap up as many of them as they can to help them create some new piri-piri-less dishes. And we're going back to the financial side. So if restaurants are closing, then the people in that area of the restaurant might see an uptick in unemployment. The area as a whole might start to go down. Nando's might have been one of those cornerstones of the local economy. The review bombing and the PR is an interesting one as well, because as we know, the internet is forever. So even if Nando's weathers this initial storm, what is the damage done long term from negative reviews, negative press, and so on? So as you can see, there are many third order consequences that you can go into. And the idea of the Futures Wheel is you generate as many of these ideas as you can, you link them together, maybe you cluster them by theme, and then what you do with the output is essentially up to you. Quite commonly, you might do a SWOT analysis to see if there are any things that you could be working on right now that would be beneficial to the company before such a massive event occurs. Or you might look at some sort of implementation graph over what would be the easiest and most difficult things to implement, what would have the biggest and smallest positive impact, and then pick a few of those to develop. So that's just one quick example of how you can apply the Futures Wheel to, in this case, a restaurant. There are obviously multiple different ways that you can implement a Futures Wheel. This is another common technique where less so looking at it in terms of first, second, and third order consequences, you now look at it as a timeline. So in the center, we'll have the immediate effect for 1 year, then we'll go out 2 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 20 years, and so on. Anything more than 5 years is always going to be finger in the air, best guess. Trying to predict anything with any degree of accuracy over 20 years in the future is, well, just think 20 years ago from today and how much has changed since then, and how much of that was accurately predicted back in the 2000s. If you need a bit more structure, or certain people like to use this structure, you can use Pestle or something similar. So rather than just thinking of ideas, you can use some structure, go through political, ethical, social, technological, environmental, and economic. There are a few versions of that, of course, and really it doesn't matter. You can tweak it to your industry or your area of focus. And just to finish up, these were a few extra ideas I thought of for the Nando's case study. We've taken some data from that lack of seasoning. So some of these you could then tie in with the piri-piri incident, or you could start from scratch and do another Futures Wheel. Lab-grown meat is one that certainly, I imagine, Nando's have looked at comprehensively already. There are an increasing number of suppliers and research companies that are generating lab-grown meat. That's an interesting sell for both companies and the public. Time will tell whether anyone is happy to eat a lab-grown chicken wrap or not. 15-minute cities, how will that impact Nando's? Will they need more cycle bays? Will they need to focus their marketing more locally rather than nationally? Transparent sourcing, generally people who are eating out and population in general really are more interested in the provenance of the food. Where does it come from? How far has it traveled? Is it something ridiculous where a restaurant is shipping in potatoes from 350 miles away? And if so, is there a good reason for that people will find palatable? Automation and robotics, some really interesting robots you can find on YouTube that are already involved in the catering industry. What impact will that have over the next 5 to 10 years? And let's just put AI in there because AI is the word right now, particularly generative AI. Will that change the world? Who knows? But it's certainly something to think about, whatever the industry you're in. So I hope you enjoy that quick overview of the Futures Wheel technique. This is part of a free course on futures thinking that I am putting together and making available on YouTube. I will also put a link in the description to sign up to my newsletter, where I share more thoughts about futures thinking, foresight, and facilitation for companies that want to thrive in an uncertain world. And that's it from me. Bye for now.